Well, I think with that said, we should probably get started because this hour is going to fly by as per usual. Denise, do we get a thumbs up that it's all set? Okay. And for everybody that's joined, a friendly reminder that we will record this session. And so if you have colleagues or classmates or friends that haven't seen it, we will have a recording and we'll email it out to everybody after so that you can pass it along or share it with whoever might be interested. Um, just some other housekeeping items. You are able to share throughout the session. We're going to be looking out for your tweets or your LinkedIn posts. You can use some of the tags that are on the left here so that we can track them and repost and share it along. So please do jump in and ask questions as we go. Uh, Also, as a bit of a housekeeping question, I have a lot of questions for Harpal, and I'm sure some of you have questions as well. So if you do have any questions, you're able to drop them in on the chat. And you can also tweet them or share them, and we'll be kind of monitoring that as I go. I've got my WhatsApp group going with Denise and Sadaf to curate and make sure that I'm trying to get to as many of them as possible. So please do jump in and ask questions as we get started. So just to break the ice and get going, if everyone can just open up the chat, feel free to just say hello on the chat and say where you're dialing in from. I know there's people from all over the world that are on this, but feel free to just use that chat, say hello. If you have a LinkedIn profile, you can always drop in your LinkedIn profile for other people to be able to build your network and stay connected with people after the event. Yeah, we have Colleen in from Alberta. Uh, and so yeah, just say hello and we'll build some network even though we're all here virtual. So with that, why don't we get started? And I'll first off welcome my guest Harpal, who's joining us, dialing in from Toronto, I believe. Uh, there's not a lot of people who have been able to accelerate their career the way he has. And there's also not a lot of people who've been able to interview people, not just from business, but from science backgrounds and all different types of degrees, and whether it's colleges or universities. He has kind of seen it all and has seen the types of interview questions, the skills, the things that help people stand out. And so today we're going to spend this coffee really kind of going deep on the different foundational skills that help people have that career success. Like I said, I have a lot of questions planned, but I will open it up and be monitoring questions. Just use the chat and we'll jump in. So with that, Harbal, maybe I'll turn it over to you just to say a quick hello before we jump into our lightning round.
Thanks, Dave. First of all, hi, everyone. Really looking forward to the next hour, and I know it's going to be challenging, but so happy to see folks from all over the country and other parts of the world join. Really hoping we can help, help share some insights and make this a useful moment of your time.
Awesome. So with that, let's break the ice. And just as we're going through it, you can see all the different people joining. We have people joining from Pakistan. We have people from Memorial University in Newfoundland studying engineering. So I know when we get into our questions, you've interviewed people and seen all different parts of career journeys from science to engineering to business. So we'll be able to explore a lot of those different questions. But let's get to know you. So we're gonna do a lightning round question. I know you haven't seen any of these questions, so uh, we'll break the ice. So uh, first off, are you sports or reality TV?
Oh, I'm sports, man. No reality TV for me.
Uh, when you're on your downtime, turn on the TV or grab a book?
Turn on the TV and read an article, if anything.
Got it. Introvert or extrovert or
It,
both?
introverted.
Okay. Uh, your dream job, if you could do anything non-traditional or otherwise, if you could do any job in the world, what would it be?
Uh, I would have a winery and I'd be out farming the grapes.
Awesome. That would be nice. Uh, does pineapple belong on pizza? Yes or no?
Yes.
Same. Same. Big pineapple on the pizza kind of kind of person. Favorite movie of all time?
It's a good one. You know what? I watched a bit of it this weekend. I think I'm gonna go with Gladiator.
Okay, funny enough, Gladiator is my favorite movie. My first date with my partner, who's in film, asked me what my favorite movie was, and I said Gladiator. And he's a cinephile and like laughed nonstop about it. So I'm a Gladiator, as cliche as it is. Uh, Coffee or tea?
I've it's been neither, but ever since I met Dave and the team, it's definitely been coffee.
Okay, good. We're getting you on the bandwagon. Uh, and then the last question is, who would be your first mentor, and how did that happen?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. First mentor would actually be someone I don't think of too frequently, but a friend who just someone who played on the same basketball court as I, and he was much older and nearer to Canada, and so he was picking it up as a sport, and we became good friends, and he taught me a lot more about life, um, and just kind of growing up.
Amazing. Well, let's jump into it. And thanks for joining us. I know your schedule is nonstop, and you've got lots to share. So first, talk to me about your career journey. Like, what does it even mean to be the head of HR at an organization like J&J? Tell us about your career journey, and a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, no, no, definitely. First, again, really excited to share and be here and hopefully help share some knowledge. I think I could see myself. I think it was about 10, 11 years ago. I was in the seats of most of the folks on the call and finishing up my undergrad. I'm a local kid, grew up in Brampton, went to U of T and studied psychology. And at that time, we were in the economic downturn. So needing to find a way out of a science degree and to enter the workforce immediately, I explored a number of programs, and there was an HR program that had a high success rate of placement, and it had a co-op portion to it that you complete after like a postgraduate diploma. Did that at Sheridan and landed a co-op at Unilever, which is a CPG company. I didn't really know about it until I applied, but got a gig in a factory environment, factory HR, lots of labor relations, negotiations, kind of stuff. And despite me not enjoying any of my HR academic matter or any of my classes, I loved the 4 month co-op, just being able to have an impact, being a part of a bigger team, and having an impact on people's lives. And they offered me back a role, stayed there for a number of years, did a number of corporate slash manufacturing roles as an HR partner, working on things like succession management, talent development, and and then I got a role which was a little bit interesting, where at that time, and this is really good, I guess, for this call, we were bringing in a lot of new hires right out of school. And so they needed someone to lead new hire recruitment, new hire programs, employer branding. And this was at a time where, companies had started moving to social and social advertising, bringing in AI. We had started bringing in AI in terms of assessments, thinking about how to really change the candidate journey, take out as much bias as possible, and bring in the best talent, regardless of where they're from, rather than the typical, hey, I've gone to these schools in the past, and I know, this person from, the person of X manager who's recommending so and so. And we really started diversifying the group of who we were bringing in, and technology essentially made that happen. But did that for about 2 years, and then got an opportunity to join J&J on the consumer health side of our business, where we really look after our products that are, again, fast moving consumer goods in mostly pharmacies and wellness sections, the Neutrogenas, Tylenols, those healthcare types of products. Again, so from an HR perspective, did a couple of roles here, and then got, at that time, what was, and probably still is my dream job, to be the head of HR for this business, leading, a HR team that spans multiple functions for a business that's over $1 billion, spread out throughout the country, and produces great products that try to help Canadians live a healthier life every day. but if, as I think about Dave, the story, I think, to be honest, I didn't expect to be where I was. And I think as we'll get through this, what I'll share is, hey, it's all about the opportunities you take and the mistakes that you make that will help you, continue to build to find your way into a path that hopefully one day, you find is the right path for you, even though you didn't think that that's where you were originally going to go.
No, thanks for that. And I mean, congrats on that career journey. And it is a lot of a lot of times people are like, what do I do when I grow up? Or what do I do next? And I think what a lot of people have to accept is you probably don't actually know what it's going to look like, but it's a really fun ride if you make it that way. And I think your career journey is a good example of that. I want to come back to one of the things you mentioned around, it's the types of experiences you take, because a lot of people are probably thinking about what can I possibly do to, break into a dream job. But before I do that, we'll come back to it. This whole idea of foundational skills. And we know when we worked with a lot of, we provide 10,000 coffees to schools all across the country so that students and recent grads can meet alumni and career professionals. But when we were promoting this with schools, we talked about soft skills, and we recently changed it to foundational skills. Like, what are those really? Like, explain what that actually is for someone who has no idea. And why do you think it moved? They rebranded from soft skills to foundation skills as of recently. Like, what are these things? Why do they matter? Maybe tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and honestly, it's I'm still learning some of them myself, right? So I think we're always on a learning journey with these. Um, but what I can share is these are generally skills that, again, there's no technical ability or there's no specific science behind them, and these are skills that as each of us work in human ecosystems, it's how they help us accelerate, advance, mobilize the businesses, personal relationships, other things better towards, common goals that we're trying to achieve. And as you think about those, you know, and we'll get into some of those, but the one thing is, I think, none of these are inherent. These are things that we all need to spend a little bit of time brushing up on. And I find that, one thing that's interesting is, for folks that are at different stages of their career or folks that are coming from different places, some schools do a really good job of investing in their their students and create programs around these, and they'll call them like career prep, and have 18 20-hour courses that students do. Other companies do a certain job of really focusing in and developing folks so you get that training um, in the workplace. But it's all out there. And as I think about the four that I've always found have been, keys to success as folks enter a new organization, a new relationship, or any new interaction, whether that's your interview or the first time, you've landed the role and now you're working with your team. There's four that, I call them my four C's. And so the first is, one, and it's a double C. So it's, consistently, you know, and comfortably being you, right? Start with being yourself, and folks needing to just be comfortable with, bring yourself to every interaction that you have, and it'll help you, take everything from there and be the best that you can be. But, and I think, we're in a world where most people are more and more comfortable with that. But I think there are three others that I think, when you think about an interview, when you think about any engagement that, really comes out, the first is curiosity, right? You can tell from, in any sort of interaction, where is the individual's curiosity, and almost everyone is curious. Some folks tend to be a little bit reserved and not necessarily share that, or feel that they may be overstepping by asking too much. And I always recommend leaning into that piece of it, right? Because that curiosity is, again, inherently human, and what makes us have these skills that cannot be replicated. Another one that for me is critical, and you'll see it in any company if you go on their page in terms of their values or their keys to success, is just being connected and being able to build strong relationships, being connected to the marketplace and understanding what's going on, being connected to one another to understand the situation of your colleague and the peer, to get a broader perspective of what's going on, to help you work together and bring things along, and also know where each member of the team is coming from. But it comes to dedicating time to connectivity, and that's what I love about the 10,000 Coffees platform, right? It is for our organization in J&J, it's helped create a whole new way of building connections and supporting folks through that. But my lastly, I think the one that always, helps me ground myself and ground others is all of those are good, but at the end of the day, there's also a level of competence. And so, in whatever you do, demonstrating your ability to be successful, your ability to, put the time in or the effort in or really understand the problem and be able to address the challenges, that level of competence is almost like it's all those other things are good, but then, you got to be able to demonstrate what you've done in your past or the challenges you've lived through and how you're able to work through them and bring them to life, to just validate all those others. But again, foundational skills in a broad bucket, human interact skills that allow us to interact with one another and work collectively towards common goals.
That's awesome. And we'll recap those three C's when we share this recording with everybody. But I think uh, I can tell you firsthand, it was a great framework because those are the types of things you probably hear a lot. And whether you're trying to find your first job or whether you're mid-career or growing through your career, those skills are you should almost think about it like going to the gym or staying active. You got to do them all the time. You don't just get those three C's and kind of check it off and move on, but like connection and competency, just to name two, are things that you have to practice kind of every single day to stay on top of those. Going back to what you talked about around getting the right experiences, uh, what would you say? Let's just say I don't have any connection, I don't have some of those competencies, I don't really have network to different people to get me a job. What are the types of things that a student or a recent grad could do? What are some simple actionable steps they could take those experiences?
Definitely. I think one, the one thing that's different between, I guess, in the last 10 to 15 years was the access to learning and access to, informational learning. And so when you think about, I had made a comment earlier about some schools do a good job of prepping. Some of the skills that they're really prepping, their students for, again, don't make their research any more valid, doesn't make their work any more effective, doesn't make the curriculum any more challenging, or the problems they've solved any more complex. But they're essentially, you know, providing a framework or guidance of how to present yourself. And in the world, in the last 15 years, we have access to TEDx, right? We have access to Udemy, LinkedIn Learning, and there's so many resources that as you get into, personally, which of these areas do you think you need to work on? And if if you're interviewing and you're finding that that's a challenge and therefore you interview with your friends as in prep and they give you some feedback, focus in and just again Google it. You will find some tips and tricks on how to, in a way that is effective for you, but give you different tactics to present yourself in a different way, but again authentically in your own. You're not presenting someone else, you're presenting yourself, just through different angles, being more aware of the setting, reading the audience a little bit differently. So I think that there's a lot in that space. But Dave, the one, the piece for me that's always I've been impressed with when meeting candidates is understanding that, some of the opportunities that folks are looking for, and we all look for, like if I'm looking, and I'll share personally, as I was looking for a role within HR, having zero HR experience, what gave me a little bit of a platform to have a good dialogue in my interview, which I was late for, by the way, significantly. Thankfully, they were okay with that. But this is my first interview. But what the platform was I had spent time during summers working in a manufacturing plant and doing midnight shifts there. And now, no HR knowledge, no idea. It was very simple, work, like doing some quality control work, but I was able to have a dialogue based on that and demonstrate some awareness of the manufacturing work environment. And I think those opportunities, all of us have, dabbled in some part of it at some earlier stage in our life, whether that's through projects, whether that's through working, whether that's through, helping others through a situation that they're dealing with in their home, like helping people move. Like there's ties into something in the business world that is always there. It's important to just think back through your journey to say, hey, what have I done that demonstrates my, some degree of understanding of this space to set me completely apart from just a brand new, a new face, a new candidate, a new applicant.
Okay. Most importantly, out of all of that, how did you still get a job if you were late for the interview? Not that we're encouraging
Yeah,
people to
yeah,
be
yeah.
late for
No,
interviews,
not at
but
all, not at all.
how did you recover from that?
So I recovered by, and it was, the story was, I didn't have a car, so my dad was going to lend me his vehicle that day, and I was going to go, and so he was going to carpool to work, and instead he forgot, took his car, and normally I'm not early, but luckily that day I woke up a little bit early and I noticed that the car wasn't there, so I took a taxi to get to him, took the 407 for the first time in my life and got to the interview in a reasonable amount of time. But at the minute that happened, I just called, and that was a learning lesson for me. It's like, hey, always give, when you have notice, just give it, because by making that call in advance, they were like, yeah, sure, you're gonna have, and I waited in the lobby for a bit, but someone made time later on, an hour later, and I was able to still do the interview and luckily got the job.
That's it. And that is a golden. There's a lot of things that we're going to learn today, but I couldn't emphasize that enough. Just like a lot of students and recent grads don't realize, just give people a heads up. Like life happens here and there, and if you kind of just are proactive in your communications, which is also a great foundational skill, uh, people are usually pretty understanding. So that makes sense. And something else that you brought up is around just like authenticity, and I think we see a lot of this across the tens of thousands of youth that use 10,000 copies to meet their alumni and to build their networks, is they can show up and almost be a little cardboard, a little stiff, and they aren't being themselves. Like, and authenticity is just such an important thing for people to break through. What advice would you give to people as they are kind of being molded a certain way in various programs that they might study? How do they be more authentic? What does that look like?
You know what? Authenticity, Dave, is I think honestly it's probably the most important piece. It's one that I truly struggled with for a long time. Um, and it's hard because you're getting advice from everyone who's saying try something like this, try something like that. And I think what um, the workplace has evolved. We've gone from a world where things were so taboo, everything needed to be politically correct, to a place in time where, not only is inclusivity a prerequisite, you're celebrating the differences of one another and trying to understand more and more. And so with that, the door is open to be yourself, right? And again, that doesn't mean you have to share something that you're uncomfortable sharing, but approach it in a way where if if you had if you had to take if you had to take 5 minutes to write down 5 attributes about yourself, you know and your goal is that whoever you meet, they should be able to get four of those fives right, because you are bringing them to the table, you're not concealing them, and by doing that you take such a pressure off yourself to perform a certain way. Being yourself, you're able to articulate your story better. Being yourself, you're able to share the complete example of whatever you're outlining. Being yourself, you're able to truly bring forward, if you have to plan interview questions at the end, like, hey, when they turn it over to you, ask questions that are real and that you really are interested in understanding. Um, and so, by what I noticed in the past, and I did this for a long time, where I would try to meet a mold of what I thought was expected. I would just put an unnecessary pressure on myself and and not perform to the way that I could. And I think authenticity of just bringing yourself forward and being you and being comfortable with those things that you want people to know about you that you believe are true. And if they know all five of them in any situation, it's completely okay, right? It helps you just be more fair and set an open context, and set a climate where they can also be authentic back to you.
Such a good framework. I think everybody who's on this, get out a piece of paper and think about those 5 attributes, or add that as a next step. But think about those 5 attributes, whether it's your work ethic or your curiosity. Like, think about those and write them out, and then right next to it, what are like questions that you could ask other people to explore those areas. I think that's such a strong framework, because we see this a lot where people forget to use their strengths, which is their attributes. And the more you can bring your full self in, but that's a really actionable framework um, to actually make that happen. Uh, I love that. So a lot of there's endless research that's telling us that employers are struggling to find the right foundational skills in the market. You've also happened to recruit a lot of people and to train a lot of people on how to be better recruiters or gatekeepers to one of the best employers in the world. Frankly, is J&J, particularly for the early career market. Um, what have you seen be like successful or different like ways to practice for early career folks to bring their soft skills most effectively or their foundational skills into these interviews and into the job search process?
Yeah, it's, I think one of the skills that I find is just so key is storytelling, right? Sharing, clearly communicating, and adjoining key components of the story to address, whatever the question is, address the challenge that you were working against. And it's something that we all need to continue to work at and refine because storytelling changes, right? Today we're telling stories virtually. In the past, almost every interview was face to face. More and more employers are getting into where it's a recorded interview and it's being assessed a different way. But that storytelling piece, as you continue to adapt it, it becomes really, really core. To allow you to share again the example. You want to share a great example in an interview. You want to share something that is easily understood, that is demonstrating the skills that you're trying to highlight, but in a very short amount of time, without and you want to limit the amount of questions you're going to get back. So the clearer you can be, the more effective it is. And I think about the world that we're in today. There is so many ways for us to continue to refine that. And I'll start with a resume. I was going to show an example, and then I realized that from a privacy perspective, it's probably not right, just because I have access to stuff. But when you look at, there's the resume profile that is, generically available that most folks, or I think a good portion of folks have. There's a little bit of a more professional one that I think the career centers do a really good job of, sharing, and it's a good baseline platform. But then you see, 1 in 10, and maybe even more frequently now, of those that are bringing to life your story in a different way. And there's if you Google creative resume, you'll see it. I checked before, but you'll see the color accents, the links to your personal portfolio. You'll see the way the story has been visualized, the graphics utilized, and you see that even from that get-go, those folks are taking a little bit more time to, and again, this is something we can all do, take a little bit more time to make sure that that first snapshot that recruiter sees, um, and again, there's AI in recruitment, so it's not going to help in every single process, but it starts off with demonstrating your storytelling capabilities, as an upfront. Then as you think about interview stage, there are, I kid you not, there are numerous, there's essentially uh, thousands of websites out there that are offering free interview questionnaires for almost every job, right? I think at the executive level, it gets a little thin, right? There's not much out there. The firms really hold on to that stuff. Internal companies like in J&J, we have it available that where hiring managers go to develop their interviews and their questions, that all employees have access to that bank, so you can be best prepared. As I interviewed for the job that I'm in today, I went through every single one of those questions that were outlined for this field at the executive stage, just to make sure that I've done everything I can to be prepared for it. But essentially, all I was doing, I was telling the same story in different ways. I was, going to try to be me. I knew which skills I thought were going to be asked, and I was going to have those examples that I felt were competent to go and bring forward and highlight. And I think, the piece, and I think I saw it in a little bit of the chat about, when folks are coming in, but that piece of, perfect execution, and can only be delivered with, perfect preparation. And you have different opportunities to bring that forward in the journey. And again, most importantly is outline, there's lots of great things that everyone does to set themselves apart, bring them forward in your questions, in the way your resume is laid out, in how your LinkedIn profile is set up, right? Make it all interactive and make it aware so that you can, have as many data points of your experience and of your capabilities out there.
Those are great examples. And I think it goes back to, how one of your first jobs was working late shifts in a manufacturing kind of facility. And even though that wasn't really directly applicable to HR, there's a lot of kind of competencies that you were able to speak through. And I think we're seeing some of the questions come through here. And what a lot of people are asking about is around, you might not have the perfect experiences. You don't have 2 years of brand management to apply into J&J and the marketing team. And there's many examples across the J&J world. Uh, what would you say are some good examples if you don't have that dream job yet, but what are some of the things or activities that people could put onto their resume that demonstrate some of these foundational skills or things that would help them stand out?
One of the most interesting marketplace changes from a workforce perspective that we've seen over the last few years has been, the shift in. Everyone talks about gig workers. What there's less discussion about is the actual number of folks that have either they'll call it like a part-time gig, but in most cases, those folks are not working. They're not working for two different enterprises. They're working for a startup, or they're running their own business, and they are, being entrepreneurial and enterprising on their own, or they're being a part of something, right? A film, being a part of, like, they're, folks that are, in media. They're part of people that are creating their YouTube profiles and trying to amplify their business that way, but it doesn't happen on its own. And those are the pieces that truly differentiate and need to be brought to the table differently, because those experiences give you a scope that, honestly, doing an internship at another big company, it's a great learning, but at the same time, we know in most cases that an internship has a very limited level of risk, very limited level of autonomy, and we try to do the best, but it's just generally you see what work goes there, versus when someone is working as a part of a team on a startup, or working in a collaborative incubator, or other things that and it could be as simple as I'm setting up my own business in landscaping, right? And here's what I've had to do, but here's what my differentiator was: is I went through online media and got familiar with Google Analytics, and started using SEO. Those types of experiences give a huge leg up. And I actually, this is, again, it's one where we deal with inside. It's not that we don't believe people don't have these skills. They're not being discussed. They're not being brought forward. So you're not getting those candidates through the door the same way. And I encourage all of us to bring that side of creativity that you have on, while you're studying or while you're working on the side of your desk. Bring it forward, because those are the pieces, or things that you've done in your past, that really demonstrate, hey, in a situation, how do you critically analyze problems? How do you, think about a business case, and then, how are you determined to bring it to life, and what kind of drive do you have? Does that answer the question, Dave?
Yeah, I think there's so many good examples there to unpack, and we're seeing questions about how do we represent these things on our resume. And what you shared that I think we should echo to everybody is, like, what are the problems that you like to solve? Like, ask yourself that question. What are the things you like to solve? Maybe it's uh, maybe it's SEO problems. Maybe it's building websites. Maybe it's branding, or creating videos if you're in multimedia, or maybe it's writing articles if you're in journalism. But take a minute and actually think about the problems that you like to solve. And then once you've done that, just like that landscaping and SEO example that you'd shared, think about some small businesses or some startups or some volunteer organizations that actually have those problems. So you probably have, I see a question coming through here about, like, their local church, or think about a club or organization you have, or like a local business who's trying to figure out this online world because, of course, in-person businesses have been really challenged over the last year. And go tell them that you like to solve that problem that you just defined, and see if they'd be open to doing it with you. And when you think about it that way, all of a sudden you can start to solve problems with people. And it's that actually helps, no matter what you've studied or what network you might have. Not only is it going to help you build the connection, or one of your three C's, but also demonstrate the competencies, which is one of your other three C's. And I think that framework or exercise for everybody that's listening to this is to think about the problems you want to solve versus the jobs you want to do. And because the jobs are always going to change, the titles are going to be different, but the problems and the modern skill sets that people are bringing are really what's in demand. So I really like what you said around the landscaping company and SEO. There's so many youth that are students or recent grads that have these 21st century skills, and finding ways to apply those in your community or within startups or small business is such an actionable way to get started and start to stand out and get noticed. So one of the things, and actually, you know what, I have a question from the audience that I'm supposed to jump to. So why don't thanks to Janice for this one question. But what she asked about, and this is probably a double click, so maybe we'll try to just get a little more focused on this. So you've solved some of these problems with people, but for new grads, what are some creative ways that you've seen candidates highlight their foundational skills on a resume or in an interview or at a networking event to make them more marketable?
It's a great question. I think I'll give an example. I think one that I was really impressed with was it was at interview stage. So the person, had a good, strong resume, had some good experiences earlier on, largely what you talked about, Dave, in like smaller, um, you know, in this case, I think it was actually, within like a religious group and within their community where they had done some work, and that was the majority of their work experience. But she came to the interview with her iPad, and 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 at first, she had her resume on it, and then halfway through, she starts, clicking through her resume into links of, hey, here is my, here's my, here's the example of the ad. Here is the performance um, of my marketing campaign, right? Here is the website that I helped develop. And then the most impressive one, again, it was just a blank paper with like, I don't know what app she used, but like it looked like sticky notes and some pen finger drawing. But it was her business case, like from where they started, what the problem was, and how they kind of approached it. And it was one extremely unformal, but it helped get to the crux of, well, how did you do that, and like what made you know that that was the right problem, and how did you validate that? And we had a real business conversation about the challenge she was trying to solve. And that gave us so much more insights on her ability to deal with other complex issues, more than just saying, tell me about your career, walk me through your resume, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. And the credit to her was that she took the informal route and she came extremely prepared with, and again, it doesn't need to look pretty, but it's the ability to get to the meat of the matter, and she was able to demonstrate that very effectively.
Such a great hack. And I think a lot of people are trained to show up at their interviews virtually or in person and it be so formal, but it goes back to that storytelling and being your authentic self. And like you have to remember, when you're going to meet and interview with somebody like Harpal, even though you have a big job at a billion-dollar revenue type of organization, uh, the more you can just humanize that conversation and bring your iPad or bring a portfolio and talk through those problems, the more you suddenly become a real person that someone wants to work with, as compared to like a resume. I think that's such a good win.
The one thing I'll share with the team is, in some of the interviews that I've done in the last few years, which are again a little bit more executive oriented, you'd be surprised the number of times, again, when we're in the office, how many times you'd end up on the whiteboard. And so, even if you have a piece of paper when you're talking, or you have a whiteboard behind you, just be free to articulate in whatever way. I don't recommend doing it completely spontaneously, right? But thinking ahead, if you want to show certain diagrams or what you want to talk about, but don't. I think what we got to get comfortable with, and yeah, what I got to get comfortable with is breaking free of the mold of what we think the conversation is supposed to be to what you're really trying to demonstrate, and you're the best person for the job because you're able to think and act and drive results a certain way.
Yeah, that's such a all really good hacks. And I'll say when I applied for my first job, I grew up in the middle of Northern Ontario. I had zero network. I was studying biochemistry, but I knew I wanted to get into business. I actually had a portfolio that literally had the nonprofits and the charities that I was working for or I had started. And that's all we went through the interview. So as they asked about, how have you done presentations? I kind of opened it up to a nonprofit that I had started, and we actually just used it was almost like a photo scrapbook that just helped guide the conversation. And that's how I landed my first job. I don't want to date myself, but it was pre iPads, but a scrapbook portfolio was just as effective. So even if you don't have an iPad, do it the old fashioned way. I did, and it worked. It worked really well. Um, the A follow-up question from Sarah, and Sarah, thanks for jumping in on this question is, we're virtual. How have you seen people do it virtually and not just kind of demonstrate their skills virtually, but any other kind of like great tips of how people have hacked the virtual interview world?
I think luckily I haven't been a part of any accidents that are that do take place in the virtual interview world. Um, but what I found is I think there are some really basic things that be prepared in terms of thinking through where you're going to take the interview from. Where do you have the right Wi-Fi access? I'm constantly monitoring mine right now because I hope it's not shifting. Thinking about how what it is. Again, you're going to share these stories. Is there a way you can use real not tokens, but and not trinkets, but what can you demonstrate? And so um, we I think a couple things is use what you have, right? Like if you have um, your degree or whatever you are trying to drive focus towards, having it handy, having it in the background is always a good way to kind of create the dialogue. Utilize again if any materials that you have to be able to share. And then I think the one thing that while you want to be prepared in advance is my one recommendation for anyone who's doing it from home right now is don't be afraid or don't worry about the disruption or the unanticipated. My kid was knocking on the door right now, and I think his mom took him away. But don't be afraid of that. And I remember my first, video call, like senior level video call after we went from home, and I was like, oh, they're coming in, and they come and they're in the scene, and it just humanizes everything, right? If it's your dog coming in, if it's your roommate, whatever. I mean, as long as everyone is clothed, it's generally not an issue, right? And just accept the fact that we're in this world and understand the situations that we're all in, and they will understand it as well, right? I can pretty confidently say that most people have only further embraced the full employee or the full applicant or the full other person, through this process.
Yeah, that's I think having some a sense of humor in all of this is such a good reminder. And so the youth and alumni and professionals that are joining this webinar are largely from the many colleges and universities that use 10,000 coffees to build networks and create connection. So everyone has access to this in partnership with RBC Future Launch. Um, so a lot of people, today can actually go on and meet alumni, or alumni can actually meet students and recent grads to have those conversations. A lot of people might be doing that for the first time. They might be sitting down virtually, having a virtual coffee or tea, using whether it's their McGill or University of Toronto or Memorial University, or UBC, as coast to coast, are using this platform. What advice would you have for somebody who's, after this conversation, they're looking to build some of those foundational skills? What are some of the best practices or, cheat sheet that you'd give everybody in building some of those connections using things like networking experiences through 10,000 coffees?
So yeah, it's a great question, Dave. I think first off, again, can't say enough about the platform, right? The ability to bring folks together in a time like this, but in a world where we're just more and more connected across globally. it's so valuable to have that introduction. I think the two things I'd recommend is one, you know, generally when you're, and I think the RBC program is phenomenal as well, but what you get out of it is the ability to make that connection. And I think that first part of that connection is really, if you have a half an hour or an hour, you want to go in and make the most of that. And what does that look like? That could look like you learning about a specific area. That could look like you learning about a specific job, learning about their career, learning, you having a challenge that you want to put out to them and get their perspective on. But being very, very clear is important. And sometimes it's difficult to get through the icebreakers. I know we got some great icebreakers, but the one thing that I've found has never failed, and what I'll say is, we're all doing this, whether you're earlier in your career, whether you are, later in your career, or whether you're, at the end of your career, you're trying to figure out what is next. You're always trying to figure out what is next, and you're always going to need to continue to network. And what's never failed up until now is when you meet with someone, when you ask them to tell them about their story, no one is ever shy, right? They will tell you everything. They will tell you their ins and outs, the moments that they're most proud about. And your ability to listen and understand, find commonalities, find nuggets that are helping you, are really, really important. So my recommendation is make the most of that moment by using the icebreakers that 10,000 Coffees provides, by thinking about what you can understand from them. But then also try to leave every connection with a node into another network, because that dialogue has gone well. You've listened, you've understood, you've shared something about you, you've had a real conversation. And, not every relationship is about, it's not about getting something out of it. It's about getting an extension into another connection, because the more we connect, the broader our network gets, the more we can, one, help one another, but two, can get closer to the areas of support that we all need. And you'll find great leaders and great mentor sponsors. They are notorious for cascading their networks rather than, holding them to themselves and making them the point that everyone has to go through.
That's a great thought, and I think asking people just what their career journey is and asking for their story, it can be as simple as that. And so when people are showing up to these conversations, just like starting there, and of course, your 10,000 Coffees matches that you get will actually have conversation starters built right in. So we'll make sure we include some of that in some of the content that we've gotten. But I think something that's come through is around how hard it is to sometimes get your first coffee. And even with platforms like 10,000 Coffees, it's not perfect, where sometimes you can't get a hold of people. What would you say are kind of tips or recommendations for people who are trying to build their network? And I'll answer my question first, and I'm going to pass it to you to share some of yours, because I'm sure you get tons of outreach from people. But I'd say the biggest piece of feedback I have for people is you have to have some persistence. So a lot of people send one message and they say, oh, Harpal didn't get back to me. I don't know how many emails you get, but you probably get hundreds. And so you have to kind of do a bit of research and be thoughtful, but you usually have to send, 2 or 3 messages with some thoughtful outreach or an article that might be of interest to get that first 30 or 60 minutes. And I think sometimes people think in, this gig, instantaneous economy where you just kind of reach out and you get the response and you get the coffee, but it actually takes around 3 or 4 messages, and this is just how networking is, to get that first coffee. And in that, do some research, think about some interesting articles, and make that outreach. The other thing that we'd say is, don't start with the head of HR for J&J. Like, look at people who are, 1 or 2 skip levels, or people who are a little more junior in their career or just a bit ahead of you as a starting point. Across our data, if you follow those things, you'll be more than successful. But Harpal, what have you seen? What have been some of, what's the best outreach you've received, and maybe what's been the worst outreach you've received?
Yeah, you know what? I think it's such a great question, Dave. I think one, I do understand it's hard, right? Like, it is time consuming. And if I think about LinkedIn as an example, I remember 5 years ago, I brought this up to a friend and I was like, we need to figure out like a platform for LinkedIn to be able to, people are messaging and getting introduced to someone but how do we get them to the right person, right? Like there has to be a more automated way to send the message to the person who's actually posted the job or the manager who's actually recruiting rather than to the like sometimes the president's being emailed about a associate brand manager job, and I know while she would love to, she just doesn't have the time to be able to sort through and redirect the folks to the right area. So I understand the challenge. I think Dave's point is really important of when you think about what you're, where you're trying to build this relationship, it's about precision, right? It's about a couple of searches to make sure you're getting to the right person or as close to the right person that you can find to initiate that conversation. And I think that's through other networking platforms, whether it's social, whether it's LinkedIn, whatever else you're using. And then I think when you think about 10,000 coffees as an example, Dave's absolutely right. It does take persistence. But that like the best example that I've had is Dave. You nailed it. It was someone reached out and said, "Hey, I've gone through." It was someone who he was looking forward to a career in HR, and she started and said, hey, I've gone through, and this is at my previous employer, I've gone through your website, right? Here's a couple things I noticed that, just from someone who's earlier in their career and looking for jobs that I think might be of value. And she kind of assessed it and just sent this note. And honestly, I don't remember what her subject heading was, so why I opened it, but it was, she took the time to add a value prop up front. And I was like, wow, so not only is she that curious, she's persistent because she invests the time to make sure, and then she followed up on it. But she, the thought process that she had to understand, hey, what am I looking for? What would be of value to us was spot on. And her and I connected. I kind of put her forward to some other folks I know in the industry, and she landed a job. But it was, I had it based on, of those C's, the competence. Like I knew right off the back that her ability to analyze a problem and take the, step forward to develop a solution, she's going to be competent in this area. And that kind of checked that box for me and really allowed me to, help put the effort in to make that connection.
Yeah, it's the good and the bad is always there's always such a difference, and I think you should spend that 15 or 20 minutes time being thoughtful with your outreach, and you'll always be that much more successful. And something we talk about from an inclusion lens a lot is neurodiversity. And one of the questions that came through is, people with neurodiversity. How have you thought about that from a networking perspective, knowing not everyone is, as the ultimate extrovert kind of that goes into a networking event and just can run through a room and meet everybody? How can you think about people who may not be as set up for success to make the most out of building connections?
Yeah, I'll share a story, Dave. I was probably 3 or 4 years into my career, and I got, and I'm gonna try to be quick. I know we're running out of time, but essentially, I got a feedback from a mentor that was around, hey, great in all these areas, need you to be more, um, you know, I, I need I need there to be, you create it wasn't that I was creating an intense environment. It was, you want to make it more comfortable from everyone around you, right? Outside the boardroom, right? Outside of the work area is fine. And so he had recommended to me to go, to go and take he had recommended a movie that I watched, a rom-com, which didn't really help. And then, um, he recommended doing an improv course at Second City. And so I took that back to my manager, and they said, no, they're not going to pay for that. That's not a core skill that they think I need to work on. But I did it anyways. And it wasn't a huge learning experience, but what I got out of it was again, being comfortable in my own skin. And for what was specific in that example for me was being okay to be awkward at times, being okay that, not every joke is going to land, and every presentation, it's not going to go as planned, and just being able to deal with it. I didn't, I'm not a great improv person or spontaneous speaker now by any means, but it allowed me to be more comfortable. And as I think back to that concept of comfort, I think that's where, you gotta you gotta you gotta get to that stage, and just, again, like we talked about earlier, you gotta be persistent, you gotta be curious, you gotta think about the connection, and keep pushing it forward. But the more you show up in a way where you're comfortable in yourself. It's okay to make mistakes. That comes across and allows us all to effectively, engage with one another and try to make the most of our relationships. I've actually forgotten about your question at the beginning, and I can't even remember if I hit it by the time I got to the end of this.
No, I think that I think we've covered so much ground, and I think that the questions always start in one direction around like neurodiversity and people that may not be like introverts, and you yourself are a
So
self-proclaimed more introverted person. Yeah.
So as let me finish that one out. So that one for me was at a time where I thought, you had to be extremely vocal. What I'll share with this team is, and again, in multiple organizations that I've worked at, I've seen, so many leaders who are introverted and are completely open about, the fact that this is not, the stage is not their level of their place of comfort, or that being always on drains them out and therefore they have to recover differently. I think i think what's important is, through neurodiversity, authentically being yourself. What in today's world is you can be effective regardless of of that introversion extroversion scale. And I've seen heads of sales, presidents, everyone across full sides of that spectrum, and just know that, again, start with being comfortable in yourself, but then do what you can to get practice in areas where you think it'll be effective. I saw a comment around Toastmasters. That's a great platform to help, to help practice and hone those skills. There's many other self-reflection techniques out there. Check out, Udemy. Practice. There's actually a TEDx platform that you can practice a TED talk, right? Getting comfortable in how you approach those types of conversations. I would recommend, checking those out and seeing if those are things that help each of us in those stages, if that's not our natural orientation to be, on stage and always on.
So there's been so many great kind of hacks that you've shared around. There's a TEDx for how to do a talk. They're building out your competencies and then mapping some of your attributes for yourself. We'll do our best to actually summarize all of those and make sure that we have a great blog post to follow. But I know we're at time, and we could probably spend another hour kind of going through all of this. So thanks. Big thanks from the hundreds of youth from across our Canadian and US colleges and universities, and people that have dialed in from all over the world to listen in. Keep the conversation going. Definitely tag 10,000 coffees using the hashtag RBC Future Launch, and we'll be resharing and posting after the event. Connection, as Harpal shared, is a really important thing that you've got to start now and kind of keep going. And of course, that's what we wake up and work on every single day at 10,000 Coffees, is building the best way for people to build that connection and informal mentoring. And so join and make sure that you're taking advantage of those solutions that all of your schools have. Use our blog to get some icebreakers, and remember to be persistent. It doesn't just kind of land in your desk and you're set. You got to send some outreach and be persistent to make the most out of it. And we have a really exciting series coming up starting in June to meet more leaders like Harpal, to have these career conversations. So look out for those invites. But with that, thanks again, Harpal, for joining. This has been amazing. And thanks for taking a break out of your busy day. And look out for the recording and a blog post with some of the summaries, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Dave. Been awesome.
Anytime. Okay.